Financial freedom is not a number. And the moment you understand that at a level deeper than intellectual agreement, deeper than nodding along because it sounds wise, deeper than repeating it as a belief you hold while continuing to behave as though it absolutely is a number and you simply haven't reached it yet, the moment you understand it in the cellular, behavioral, neurologically grounded way that actually changes how you think and therefore how you act every single day with money, that is the moment your relationship with financial freedom fundamentally and permanently shifts from something you are chasing to something you are building. And the difference between those two orientations is not semantic, it is not motivational, it is psychological and neurological and behavioral in ways that produce completely different financial lives over the same span of time with the same inputs and the same opportunities. Which is why today we are going inside the psychology of financial freedom completely. Because the external strategies of financial freedom, the investment accounts, the passive income streams, the budgeting systems are widely available and widely understood. And yet, most people who know all of them remain financially unfree. Which means the gap between knowing and achieving is not informational. It is psychological, and psychological gaps require psychological solutions. Let's begin with the most important and most consistently overlooked truth in the entire conversation about financial freedom. And that is that financial freedom is first and most fundamentally a state of mind. A specific psychological relationship with money, security, and the future that exists independently of the balance in any account. And that without the psychological foundation, no amount of money produces the experience of freedom that the concept promises. Research by psychologist Tim Kasser at Knox College, whose work on materialism and well-being is among the most robust in positive psychology, consistently demonstrates that people who pursue financial goals primarily for the sense of security, freedom, and autonomy, they believe those goals will show consistently lower well-being, not higher, the more financially successful they become, because the psychological need they are attempting to satisfy through financial achievement is not a financial need at all. It is a need for safety, for control, for the experience of sufficiency, and these psychological states cannot be produced by external financial conditions alone when the internal psychological relationship with money remains governed by scarcity, anxiety, and the chronic sense that no amount is ever quite enough. This is the financial freedom paradox, and it affects an astonishing proportion of people who have achieved by every external measure exactly what they spent decades working toward. The portfolio is there, the passive income is there, the financial independence number has been crossed, and yet the anxiety persists, the scarcity feeling persists, the sense that it could all disappear persists, and the freedom that was supposed to arrive with the number does not arrive, because freedom was never in the number, it was in the psychology, and the psychology was never directly addressed, while all the energy went into the strategy. Now let's examine what financial freedom actually requires at the psychological level, because the research from financial psychology, positive psychology, and behavioral economics converges on a specific and coherent picture of what the internal experience of financial freedom consists of, and it is both simpler and more demanding than most financial content acknowledges. The first psychological component is what researchers call financial self-efficacy. The deep, experientially grounded belief in your own capacity to manage money competently, to navigate financial challenges without being overwhelmed by them, to make sound financial decisions under conditions of uncertainty, and to recover from financial setbacks without catastrophizing or losing the long-term orientation that wealth building requires. Self-efficacy, a concept developed by psychologist Albert Bandura, is not confidence in the colloquial sense. It is not a feeling of positivity about money. It is a specific, domain-relevant belief in one's own competence that is built through the accumulation of genuine mastery experiences, small and then progressively larger demonstrations to oneself that one is capable of doing the thing one doubted one could do. This means that financial self-efficacy cannot be installed through affirmations or mindset work alone. It requires behavioral evidence, the track record of actual financial decisions made soundly, actual financial challenges navigated successfully, actual progress observed over time, which is why starting somewhere, anywhere, however small, is not just motivationally useful, but psychologically essential, because the first small mastery experience is the foundation upon which every subsequent layer of financial self-efficacy is built. The second psychological component is the development of what financial therapists call a healthy money relationship. A relationship with money that is characterized by neither avoidance nor obsession, neither terror nor recklessness, but by a clear-eyed, emotionally regulated, behaviorally competent engagement with financial reality that allows you to look at your numbers honestly, make decisions deliberately, plan with genuine long-term orientation, and experience money as a tool you direct rather than a force that governs you. Most people's relationship with money is anything but healthy in this sense. It is characterized by avoidance of financial information that feels threatening, by emotional spending that temporarily regulates uncomfortable feelings, by financial paralysis in the face of complexity or uncertainty, and by the specific and debilitating anxiety of a scarcity mindset that makes every financial decision feel like a potential catastrophe, regardless of objective financial position. Building a healthy money relationship requires exactly the same things that building any healthy relationship requires: honest communication, which in this context means regularly and clearly looking at your financial reality without emotional avoidance, consistent engagement rather than episodic crisis-driven attention, and the willingness to address conflicts and discomforts directly rather than hoping they will resolve themselves through inattention. Now, let's go into the neuroscience of financial decision-making. Because the gap between the financial behavior people intend and the financial behavior they actually produce is not a gap of motivation or information, but of neurology. And closing it requires understanding the specific brain mechanisms that govern every financial choice. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and the kind of future-oriented thinking that all wealth building requires, is in continuous competition with the limbic system's immediate reward processing, and the quality of your financial behavior at any given moment is essentially the outcome of this competition. Under the specific neurochemical and physiological conditions of that moment. Chronic financial stress, which is the baseline condition of most people who are not yet financially free, loads the system with cortisol in a way that specifically impairs prefrontal cortex function and amplifies limbic reactivity, which produces a predictable degradation of financial decision quality precisely in the circumstances where good financial decisions are most needed. This is the neurological trap of financial scarcity that Harvard economist Senthil Molainathan and Princeton psychologist Eldar Shafir documented in their landmark research. scarcity captures cognitive bandwidth, and the mental load of managing financial scarcity impairs the executive function that would be required to escape it, creating a neurological feedback loop in which the condition of scarcity makes it neurologically harder to make the decisions that would end the scarcity. Breaking this loop requires not just financial education, but neurological intervention, the management of financial stress through physical exercise, adequate sleep, social support, and the development of a long-term financial plan that converts the diffuse anxiety of not knowing into the specific, manageable discomfort of knowing exactly where you are and having a defined path forward. Because specific problems are neurologically less threatening than vague ones, and a less threatened prefrontal cortex makes better financial decisions. Let's now examine the psychological concept that most directly governs the lived experience of financial freedom. And that is the concept of enough, which sounds deceptively simple, but is psychologically one of the most sophisticated and most demanding achievements available to a human being in a culture that has industrialized the manufacturing of artificial insufficiency. The hedonic treadmill, the well-documented psychological phenomenon in which human beings rapidly adapt to new levels of material well-being and return to their baseline level of experienced satisfaction, is the primary mechanism through which financial achievement consistently fails to deliver the sustained sense of freedom and sufficiency it promises. Every acquisition, every financial milestone, every income increase produces an initial elevation in subjective well-being that fades within months as the new level becomes the new normal, and the goalposts of sufficiency move outward to maintain the same psychological distance from the experience of enough that existed before the achievement. The person who believes they will feel financially free when they reach a certain number will, in the majority of documented cases, find that reaching the number produces not the experience of arrival, but the recalibration of the number, that the amount that was supposed to be enough becomes the amount that reveals how much further there still is to go. The psychological skill of cultivating genuine sufficiency, of training the mind to experience what is already present as genuinely adequate rather than perpetually inadequate relative to a moving target, is not a passive acceptance of less than you deserve. It is the active, deliberate psychological work of interrupting the hedonic adaptation cycle through practices that neuroscience and positive psychology have now documented with considerable precision. Gratitude practices that redirect attentional resources toward what is present rather than what is absent. Consumption awareness that builds the metacognitive capacity to observe the adaptation process as it occurs rather than being carried along by it unconsciously. And the deliberate cultivation of non-material sources of meaning, connection, and experience that provide durable well-being at zero financial cost and therefore no hedonic adaptation cost. And finally, the most important and most integrating psychological truth about financial freedom that this entire video has been building toward. The truth that sits beneath every strategy, every habit, every investment decision, and every financial behavior that the pursuit of financial freedom requires. Financial freedom is not achieved at a destination. It is built in a direction, and the building of it is itself the experience of it, which means that the person who is moving deliberately, intentionally, and with genuine psychological alignment toward financial freedom is already experiencing a form of it. The specific freedom of agency, of self-determination, of the daily behavioral confirmation that they are the author of their financial life rather than its passive subject, long before any external number confirms their arrival. The external freedom, the passive income, the fully funded accounts, the ability to choose work rather than need it is real and worth building. And we are not romanticizing the difficulty of financial constraint or suggesting that the material reality of financial freedom does not matter. It matters enormously. But the psychological freedom, the internal sovereignty over your relationship with money, with security, with sufficiency, with the future, that freedom is available right now. Not after the number is reached, but in the moment you decide to stop letting an unexamined psychological relationship with money govern your financial behavior and start building consciously and deliberately and with the full depth of the psychological understanding that this video has offered you, the internal architecture of a mind that is already, in every way that ultimately matters most, genuinely and completely free. Subscribe for more mind secrets.